Welcome, I'm TAMKO and you are listening to African Action Heroes, the podcast, the online community developed by and for creatives and changemakers of African descent to facilitate promotion, collaboration, and empowerment. Thanks for joining us. If this is your first time, hear what you can expect. An open-hearted conversation with creatives and changemakers of African descent, sharing their journey, useful tips and insights to help you to be at your very best while creating content and stories about us through our own narrative. Also, it will be a great opportunity to discover and connect with incredible and inspiring rising stars looking like you.
So thank you very much for taking the time to be there with me.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for that great experimentation. Right now, the narrative in Hollywood and is not really multicultural and doesn't represent everybody beside like the Western Caucasian culture.
Yeah.
And from that point, I would like to know like how came that concept of EXT?
Sure. So I guess just originally the idea, I just had this idea of, I read up on a lot of science fiction and I see what's kind of being said in that genre and by writers and novelists and filmmakers and so on. And it just felt very much like it was stuck in the 80s and like early 90s.
Yeah.
And a lot of the themes were like a lot of the themes were kind of going to this place, like, what if, our minds could be uploaded into a digital world? And it's like, sure, okay. And usually that's where a lot of stories ended, with that kind of being, realized and say like, holy crap, you can do it. Or that there was something impossible about it, or that it wasn't, you couldn't do it, or there's something horrific about it. And so I just kind of was more interested in, okay, but if that's a goal, like what happens next? And that was really what kind of fueled my imagination for it. And usually whenever I come up with any kind of story, it doesn't come from really one place. It comes from kind of a bunch of different places and different ideas that eventually coalesce into one thing. So
what do you mean exactly?
Yeah. So for that, like I was saying, like that idea of like what happens next was kind of one idea in the back of my head. Another was I thought it would be really cool to almost do something that was a reverse Terminator in a weird way, where it was like, what if the heroes were robots and they were going through the real world and we had to figure out like what that adventure would be? And then it was also kind of like, well, what would those robots be? Like, how could it be interesting? And then I kind of pulled from all these movies that I really liked, one of them being The Seven Samurai. And I just like that kind of idea, and especially with samurai films, there's this idea or like underlying story about a changing time and how do you cope with the changing time. So for The Seven Samurai, it was very much, the time of the samurai was ending, and you had all of these kind of, ronin that were out in the world, and they didn't really have a purpose, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? And in the end, they still don't have anything to do, but they kind of go out doing good. And that's kind of the whole purpose of that story. So so it was just all of these ideas coming into one place, and then I just kind of came up with this idea of, okay, what would that world look like? What happens once everyone uploads their mind into a digital world? What does the politics of that look like? What does the economy look like? What does, how do people work? Because they're still people. If you're copying a human mind, you're still copying an essence of what a person is. So to me, it was kind of, okay, so you have these people that upload their minds into a digital world. Obviously, they're still going to want to be human, right? So they're still going to want to eat, even though they don't have to, because there's a joy with eating. They're going to want to, still have sex. They're going to still want to have relationships. They're going to still want to have kids.
Yeah.
And that's where it was kind of interesting, where it's like, okay, now let's go even further with that. Let's go crazy into the future. Like after that's happened, and what happens to those kids, right? And then what happens to their children? And it's like, well, you start seeing, and then of course I'm kind of seeing what's happening in our world with you know, there being a problem with generational conflict, where, you know, even in here in Canada, Japan, and the US, you have this thing where the older generation is not retiring for a longer period of time. They're staying very present in the world, and it's kind of creating a roadblock. Where you see, you know, the generation that comes next can't really do anything, and they can't really go anywhere. And then, you know, their children, it just kind of keeps having this, you know, like Russian doll effect. And it's, and I just thought that was such an interesting idea, where it's like, what happens? I mean, we always end stories with immortality being kind of the be all end all, but if it becomes normalized, it becomes political. And so then I just kind of kept going on that tangent. So all this time, and this is just the case with everything I do, every story I do, I'm drawing, I'm writing, I'm you know, 3D modeling and sculpting, and just having kind of a foot in all of those different art forms while I'm thinking. That's just how I work and how I create things. That's what I've done since I was a kid. So in the end, it just became this world where it's like, okay, there's a generational war, and, you know, eventually that bleeds onto the outside world where people haven't been for centuries, and now you have to put together a group of people that know how to survive that real world. Well, not everyone would have that skill anymore, so you have to kind of choose from what you had. So you'd look at gamers, and gamers would probably have a very good understanding of how to survive in a real world. Would be based off of it. And then it's like, okay, you need someone that could hack or knows how to reprogram other machines. So you get a hacker from that world, which would probably be a criminal. And then you get this person that would understand what it means to, you know, to fight, that, you know, has done that in her own way. And then you have all these different people, and that would have to be from different generations. So you have a group of people that have never spoken to each other before, out in the wilderness, having to save humanity, but at the same time kind of have to understand, oh, I actually didn't know a lot about this generation or about that generation. They have to rethink themselves and challenge their identity and what that means in a world that they've never seen before, or if they haven't seen for centuries. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's really deep.
I've always had a trouble being in shallow conversation. it's always either a 10 or no, it's just nothing but a 10 for me. It's just always but those are always been, I mean, that's the thing I've always loved about movies and entertainment is, you know, if you're going to tell a story, I think it's, I mean, you can tell whatever story you want, but I think there's something to be said about telling a challenging story. For me as a kid, those stories, even if I didn't get them right away, I loved living up to that challenge. So it's like, you know, think about this. Like, what do you think? And it's like, I don't know. I'm going to keep watching it because I like that feeling. You know, and I think there's nothing wrong with setting an audience expectation up here. Because, you know, maybe they don't want to go there. That's fine. They don't watch it. But I think there's a lot of people, especially kids, where they don't know that they're not supposed to. So they rise to the challenge.
You know. No, but I think that's what I like basically in the short. It's because that's really that brings you somewhere like that you're not used to, at a place where you're not used to be, and you not used to be, but you don't see often in the show. And that's why right now I kind of stopping watching movies or like TV show, because it's like too shallow and it's like they treat the audience like dumb people who just want to, I don't know, see some explosion here and there, and that's it. Some special effects and
That's sadly, I think that's. I mean, I call myself, you know, a big sci-fi fan, but my list of favorites it's a very small list. And I think a big reason of that is because I've become such a fan. I'm very critical of the medium and of the genre. So and I loved. I mean, originally it made film has always trailed on the ambitions of sci-fi. Like that medium has always, like Earth to the Moon, like some of the first films ever made were these creative, you know, sci-fi ideas, and and because of that, you have to advance the tech to tell those stories.
Yeah.
So there was always this relationship between telling a story, but also understanding the medium enough to push it. So I think I've always seen those things going hand to hand. So I love VFX, I love CGI, so long as it's serving a purpose, as long as it's telling a story, and so long as it's presenting you something that you've never seen before. And that to me has always been a really important thing. So, you know, in the 90s when CGI blew up, it was because we've never seen that before.
Yeah.
Like we saw, you know, Jurassic Park, we saw dinosaurs that looked as like living things, and we saw, you know, the T-1000. It's like, well, you couldn't do that any other way. You had to use CG. So there was just this very one-to-one relationship with innovation and storytelling, and I think we've lost that. Especially like as the 90s got, like at the end of the 90s, I think there was a point. I mean, you still got good films. You still had The Matrix, for example. You still had, you know, like those kind of films that were still pushing things. But at a certain point, there became a divide where the directors and the VFX specialists or artists were not a part of the same team, really. It became more of a service, which is great, but I think you can very well tell when there's a disconnect between a director's story and the images they want to use to tell that story. Sometimes it's very direct and it's great, like James Cameron and some of those kind of directors. But then you have some where you could tell they didn't care. They just kind of like, just give me whatever works. And, you know, just flashy, bright, and so it's like any element in film. If you don't care about it, it just becomes, it feels like it's running automatically. You know, and it's not really utilizing the tool set that you're supposed to use if you're in film. So I'm skeptical about the genre too. I feel like it should be limitless, but I think it's an imagination problem. I think there's just not enough people telling stories we haven't heard before.
And the thing is, how come like EXT is not yet in in theater or something like that?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons, I'm sure. I mean, like with the short, it's been great because we've just been going all over, I mean, especially all over North America, but it has gone to Spain, to Australia, you know, a few other places in Europe. It's doing really well. It's really getting attention, which is fantastic. And I think it's also, I mean, it's tough because it's such a big story. And it's so hard to get all of that into one short.
Of course.
What's always so good about the short that I really, really love and I'm proud of is that it always initiates a conversation. And people that if I'm able to watch in the theater and then get questions after or talk to people after the film, that conversation just goes for a really, really long time. And it's great. It's the kind of thing, those were the kind of movies I've always loved. And so to see it do that is something I'm really proud of. But I mean, at the moment, I've been working on creating it as a package for an animated series. And specifically as a series because the story is so grand and there is a lot of things I would love to say in that world. I did write it originally as a feature, but after, you know, years working on the short, but then also like following it in festivals, it just brought me to a place where it's like, I think this can be told really well in animation, and especially utilizing, you know, CG and 2D together. I think I love both styles, and I think there's something that both bring to the table. So I think, especially in talking about this universe, I think using both is an ideal way to do it. So now, especially this year, I've been just pitching.
Yeah.
Almost nonstop to different studios, and then like adapting things and then rewriting things, and it's great because there's so much interest, and it's just about getting it to the right kind of eyes. And it's tough because it is an ambitious project.
Yeah.
You know, it's not it is its own Star Wars in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So much world building and so many character building, and it's tough to do when it's just me.
Yeah.
So you know, so I'm literally designing and building a lot of the characters on my own. And then for the short, obviously I had a team, and they're all just really amazing, talented artists that I've worked with in the past. But it all starts from, you know, me putting pen to paper, whether that be a drawing, you know, modeling or writing. So.
Because I was watching the pictures of like the shooting that you did and everything. And I was like, wow, because you have the access to like some great equipments, like green screen facilities and everything. And I was like, how did you manage to put that together? Because it's a personal project that you started, and like there is no like big producer behind that, all that kind of things. So could you explain like how you managed to like from the idea of EXT to go to in production and after post-production and everything?
Sure. So, I mean, I guess just really quickly, the first thing I did was, you know, I had a bunch of drawings, I had a bunch of writing, I wrote a feature, and I was just there's a certain point, obviously, in terms of how far you can go, or you need help. And you can't do it all alone, even though I still, like, in a stupid way, I seem to always want to try to. You shouldn't, and at some point you run into that wall where you just can't. And so, you know, I just very openly put out a call on LinkedIn and just say, like, look, I have this project, I really believe in this story, I really believe in the world, but I need some help, and I'd love to, you know, if there's any producers out there that are interested in this idea, let's talk. So that brought a lot of conversations, but there was one person, my producer for this short specifically, Zeus Contayanis, who runs Zeus Pictures, and it's just a young up-and-coming producer who's done a lot of short films before and directed. And he was just like, this looks awesome. This is totally the kind of thing I'd love to help out with. Let me read the script. Let me give you some ideas, some pointers, and we'll see what we can do. So through that, he was like, okay, this story is huge, and I'd love to work on it. However, because it's huge, it's crazy expensive. So there's no way I can like get that money, but I can give you enough to start a short as a proof of concept. And I was like, that's awesome. That would be fantastic. So just with that amount, and it wasn't a lot, but the whole point was I proved to him and show, you know, through my portfolio and what I can do, that this is something that I can do with a very minimal crew and cast. So because I've been in the industry for 10 years. I know I've jumped around to so many different VFX houses and animation houses. I know what costs money. And I know how, if you're planning your VFX from script, from the point of writing, you save so much money because you're making sure that the effects that you have are telling the story you want to tell. There's no wasted, you know, like there's no fat to cut out. There's no like, let's try this and then have to go back and say, oh, I guess we couldn't do that. Let's try this. And it's very one-to-one. So from that point, it was just, you know, obviously the first thing to do was to put together a crew. And from that, it was just, I literally had moved to Toronto. I was in Toronto for maybe about 2 months. As soon as I came here, and I have family here, but I haven't lived here for about like 16 years. So when I moved here, and that was about 5 years ago now, I immediately just try to search, just did LinkedIn, emails, just scanned the area and saw who was available and who was interested. And usually, I think that's what's really cool about sci-fi too, is when you have an interesting high concept idea, it attracts the right kind of minds and talents, you know? So there was, you know, people were like, oh, I know this guy, he would be really good. This would be really good. And just really quickly, I kind of built my team, and they're a team I would still work with on anything I want to do in the future. And so, you know, Bob Gundu, who's a cinematographer here in Toronto, he's just brilliant. He has a lot of equipment, and he's really passionate about filmmaking. So he was able to do a lot of this for an insanely short amount of time and budget. And because he believed in the project, and same with our cast, who was able to hold auditions, and you know, through the Toronto Tip program, which was really great. We were able to find a good crew and actors that can really get these roles right. And then it was just, again, just searching online, seeing, you know, like who's out there, and finding green screen studios. Some were really expensive, but also for what we needed, we didn't really need a huge studio. We knew how to, you know, I've shot other short films before and been on other sets, and I know what it takes to get the elements you want. So, you know, and I think that's the key point, is wherever you're missing either money or resources, that's where creativity comes in.
Yeah.
Because, you know, there's a lot we didn't have. But we were able to make it happen because of, you know, our enthusiasm and also our creativity and our imagination. So we were able to stretch very little to make it go a long way. And so yeah, and then after that point, you know, when it came just to the VFX side of things, I would just talk about it to my colleagues at work, and they'd be like, hey, if you need any help with this, and that was literally everyone that worked on it. It was just, you know, a conversation or two, to the point where they were on board and they were interested, and, you know, we made sure everyone was paid, and then we executed this project. So it's and Toronto, I think, has that spirit in it. I think there's something really special about Toronto talent. Number one, it's diverse as hell. Like, I think it's so cool that there's so many people from so many different backgrounds, and we all love the same things. It's like, yeah, I'm doing a robot action movie, and they're like, I'm on board. And it's just like that, everyone came together for this project. And especially in the VFX, especially in the, you know, the junior roles for almost every company, there is no majority. It's all over the place. Everybody's there in terms of gender, in terms of, you know, orientation, in terms of background, racially. It's very rich, and I think that goes a long way, especially when it comes to, you know, giving everyone a say in terms of what the project looks like.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really cool, and it really came together well. And I mean, we released the film last year, and we've just been following it wherever we could. So
because I saw that the crew and the cast was like super multicultural, and I really like that. And I mean, that's always, I mean, especially when it comes to this story in particular, one thing I really wanted to nail down, and this is, you know, in the animation project as well, is an honest understanding of what humanity is. Because one of those things that's kind of a pet peeve for me, in particular, is sci-fi tends to be it likes to talk a very broad game and a very like high concept game, but it's stuck in a very limited perspective and a very limited point of view. And can you develop?
I mean, it's like a lot of sci-fi loves to talk about, you know, humanity and what humanity is and all these sorts of things, but we only see predominantly Caucasian males in those worlds.
Saving the world.
It's literally like it's like everyone else vanished and no one talks about it. It's like a weird situation. And you know, I remember even and I think it's hard for me to kind of even get into like sci-fi that's pre 80s for that reason, because it's even worse on that end, where it's like Logan's Run, and it's like there's not a single person of color in a whole of the US, which is very strange to me. And, you know, and it's a weird situation, because I feel like it betrays a very sad fact about the imagination, or like just the human imagination in general, and that is it's very poor, and it's very limited by perspective, and humanity for me is just such an insanely dense concept.
Yeah.
And because it's, you know, it has 7 billion stories and 7 billion members, and, you know, and when most people think about humanity, they're probably thinking of just people that look like them.
Yeah.
But it's so obviously larger than that, and in a way that I always found profound, because it's I mean, even in the way that we kind of use nomenclature to figure it out, and of course we're using, you know, European or Anglo-centric nomenclature for that. And, you know, it's like, you have mankind. Well, already we're talking about half the human population. So that word doesn't make any sense. You know, and then we go even further, where it's just like, you know, it works so backwards. We have to find words to describe the majority of humanity in a way that the normal words don't encompass. So, for example, you know, we use the word LGBTQ, like, and people are like, oh, why are there so many letters on this word? It's like, well, because that's humanity. Like, you know, like it's like that's a lot of humanity. That's a huge section of humanity, and it's like, you know, we use the word the like BIPOC. Yeah. And it's the same thing. It's just like, you know, Black, Indigenous, people of color. It's like, well, that's most of the planet. You know,
definitely,
like, that's literally like 80% of the planet, if not more. And it's like, that's insane to me, because it's like, though that's literally most of the planet, and we're going out of our way to describe, you know, mostly everybody. And the stories that are being told are like not even 1% of the human story. Yeah. So, you know, when I watch sci-fi and they're saying like, what does it mean to be human? And it's mostly like a, you know, like a white male protagonist that's asking that question. And it's like, and then the answer tends to be like, well, it's something that is not robotic, or something that is not this. And usually it doesn't give an answer. It likes to leave it up in this ambiguous thing where it's like, it's, you know, the soul of it, or the heart of it. And it's like that. On the surface, there's something, I get it. There's something very, you know, poetic about that. But you didn't actually present a question that you were interested in answering. Yeah. And that's always been my frustration, is that it leaves it so open that it actually isn't tackling that question. And that's what's so difficult about it, because when I watch, especially growing up as a kid, all of my heroes were the robots, the aliens, and those sorts of things, because I grew up in Regina, Saskatchewan, which is a predominantly white community. Yeah. And I understood what it's like to be, you know, gawked at, or, you know, very clearly seen as a visible minority, and always questioned where I was from. You know, and I'd say Toronto, and that clearly wasn't what they were expecting me to say. You know, it's like, why do you talk that way? Why do you act that way? Why are you interested in science? Like, I had to explain myself, my humanity, like consistently through my life. So when I would watch sci-fi movies, and, you know, white people never had to answer those questions, but robots and aliens did. Yeah. You know, and so it's like, I got that. I felt I understood that part of the story, which is like, defend your existence. Yeah. Always. And try and explain to everyone else what your position in the human world is. Yeah, yeah. And you know, like, when you're a kid, that gets exhausting. But I'm also kind of glad I had it, because it made me, I was always thinking about that. Like, what is humanity actually? And it's like, you know, it's not what I'm seeing in film. Yeah, that's true. Already, I mean, if you look at most sci-fi, there are exceptions, and there are more exceptions. It's getting better, but it's predominantly white male.
Yeah.
Hetero as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's such a slice, like such a thin slice of what, you know, that story is, that it's like, you know, and of course, when minorities usually tell stories, it has to be about a reality, or what happened in the past, or the story that's most accepted, when it's like, you know, most of what the stories that have been told by almost every culture isn't really about reality. It's about their future.
Yeah.
You know, and it's about their past. Like, storytelling is such an amorphous, grand thing to do, that especially in the West, you know, it's like, well, we're gonna go, if you think of a black film, it's to talk about black society or black culture. And it's like, you know, but white culture doesn't, and it's like, it doesn't have to keep explaining itself. Whereas,
that's true.
You know, and it's not that it doesn't exist. That's the crazy thing. You know, like, there's like, it's so, especially now, it's obvious because of the internet. There's so many black nerds. Like, it's a thing, and it's like, there's so many, you know, and like black anime fans, black sci-fi fans, black fantasy fans. It's always been there. This isn't new. It's just it's the first time people are kind of seeing and hearing about it, and that includes black people too. Like, especially as a kid, I didn't know there were other people like me.
I completely relate, because me I'm kind of pioneer of like the development of animation in Europe, in France specifically, and at that time, so it's like maybe over 20 years ago. Like, I was probably one of the rare like African guy in those stuff, and like, when it comes to cosplay, oh my god, I never did cosplay because of that, because it was like, oh no, you cannot do that character, you have to do this character. And me at that time, it was like the time of a Street Fighter, maybe 2 or 3, I don't remember, with the DJ guy. So basically, I could do only that character in terms of cosplay, because in animation there is no.
Well, and that's the other part of it, is that, like, you really want to. I mean, you know, like, I mean, as a kid, I said, like, you know, like, most of my heroes were like aliens or robots and stuff. And they weren't, but it's like, also the Ninja Turtles was like, that's awesome, because I could totally cosplay as that, or like something like that. Like, there was nothing weird about that. But like, you know, I guess of all of them, it was like Batman. And Batman was my favorite for a while, until Spawn came out, and then I was all about Spawn, because he was black. And I was so all about it, and I loved that character, and it felt, and there was, I mean, when people kind of say, you know, like representation matters. For the people that don't get that, it's like, it would be so great to live in that kind of privilege, you know, because it's like, to see yourself everywhere, it already cements you as saying, oh, the world sees me as a default. But it's been very clear that that's not me. You know, and I think that's all. I mean, that's talking about absurd ideas. The idea of a default human is also patently absurd, but it's also, you know, it's one of those things where it's just like, this is what culture and media does. People believe those stories more than they believe reality, sadly. And so when I've seen people kind of like brush things off, it's like, it's just a movie, it's just television, it's just this. It's like, if it should be just entertainment, but people believe it. Especially if they've never actually understood those stories from the people that are represented in them. So, you know, when I was living in Regina, and everyone's like, why don't you talk black? You know, like, what is, like, because like, I could easily reflect it in the opposite. It's like, what does it mean to talk white? like it's such an absurd question, and only but it's because all they've ever seen of black people was what they saw on television.
Exactly.
So, and movies. So, you know, it might not be harmful, you know, for the people that aren't living those experiences, but someone that is, it's, you know, people would rather believe that what they saw on television was real than what I was as a human being was real. And that's weird.
That's completely weird.
You know, because it's and I've noticed this especially, you know, lately, now that we're having this conversation where you know, characters are swapping gender or race, and it's like, you know, a black 007 or a black Superman, and obviously it's hit with just a wave of rage and like, you know, you can't do that, it's this and that. It's like, but they're not a real character. You know, and I've seen like people that are fans of these characters, they will outright verbally assault or yell at real actual people. Yeah. And in the defense of a made up character. And it just kind of, it's just one of those things where, I mean, as a kid, you know, and my dad was always like, just remember, it's not a movie, it's just a movie, it's not real, and all these things. He's like, yeah, I got excited, and you know, I love film and I love stories. Yeah. But it just kind of made me realize, like, it is kind of nuts that people get attached more to stories or fictions than they do of reality.
And I think it's probably because that's touched their identity, because they don't have that, because they have their representation, and they don't want to like compromise or change or be represented by something else than themselves. Quotes.
Well, it reminds me a lot of like when I think of like when I see some people where you know, they say like, you know, Pluto's not a planet anymore. And it's like, yeah, it's true. It's not. The science has gotten better where we understand what a planet means, what, you know, a star means. Like, there's a classification, and as we learn more about it, the words change. Yeah. But I've seen people be like, well, it was a planet to me. and there's like a weird thing there where it's just like, no, just change your beliefs. Like, you have to now update your view. It's not a planet anymore, and that's okay. And it's the same with like dinosaurs had feathers. Yeah. Like, well, they didn't when I was a kid. And it's like, well, if we know that they did now, technically they always did. Yeah. But there's something about this sense of like my childhood being a precious thing, and honestly, I feel like no one's childhood is precious. That's the whole point. You grow up, you learn, you know, how the world has changed, and that it wasn't as you thought it was, which is just what growing up is. And you adapt your thinking to it. But like, it just kind of shows just how in love, you know, just humanity in general is with the words that they use. And I find that that's such a strange thing, that people would rather defend a word which represents a real thing than the real thing that it's supposed to represent. Yeah. And I mean, it's weird because, you know, when I was young, when I was in high school, I wanted to go into the sciences. I was thinking about it, either physics, astrophysics, or biology. And in the end, I chose to go for art. Visual art specifically. I was always drawing and creating worlds, and it's like, no matter what, I'll always be doing that. So that just feels more honest to me. Yeah. But there was a point when I was in that path where I was like, maybe I chose the wrong thing, because I was in art school and it was very philosophical, or not philosophical. I love the philosophy of it, but it was very static, it felt, and it was very insular. So it wasn't about necessarily kind of reaching out. It was more of kind of recycling the same ideas within its community. And I was kind of like, maybe I should have gone into science. But there was a point where I was kind of like, I realized the power of storytelling. Because I mean, I love stories, but that I knew in my head, I thought that adults cared more about reality than I did about stories. I didn't understand humanity as a kid, and I would say most of us don't. But like, I just assumed that, you know, like adults really do care about what's real and what's true, which clearly isn't the case as we've seen this year anyways. But with that, I with learning more about how to tell stories and how to use stories and how to, you know, write characters and all the components that come together when it comes to telling a story, I realized that no, people love stories. You know, like you can hand someone a data chart about everything that's happening somewhere, but if you have that next to, you know, a painting or, you know, a video of someone passionately giving a speech, they'll choose the speech almost every time.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those things about humanity that's so strange, is that it in order to understand reality, it needs a fable. Yeah. You know, like it almost, it's like the only way to kind of like, whereas like machines, you need, you know, binary or something artificial to understand reality. For us, we do the same thing. You need to understand a story. Like stories are the only way that we seem to understand truth, or the idea of what truth is. Yeah. And so, you know, when we're thinking about things that we think are true, they usually are a story. And that could be something as simple as a word. So, you know, that, you know, like man and woman, that's true. And it's like, well, not really, because biologically speaking, there's been everything in between. Yeah. It's not, there's gradients everywhere. Like the reality of the world is just gradients. But because we're taught as a kid that there's these, you know, there's 5 colors and that's it. It's like when we get older and someone says, actually, no, there's a 6th color, or there's a 7th. We're like, stop ruining the universe for me.
That's exactly like, that. That's true.
You know, it's like, how dare you break down the fundamental like part of the world? And it's like, no, the words can change. The words are a means to meaning. But we always confuse that with the truth of the world. And I think that's where I see a lot of people's frustration come from, especially when it deals with people. I think the subject of people is just such a complicated thing in reality. And we've used such stupid words to figure it out, and such small, you know, like cramped words to understand it, where it's like, you know, even the nomenclature we use for race today, where it's like Asian, well, that's already pretty much half the planet. Yeah. And it's a continent, and it's like Africa. 2 of the largest continents now have one word associated with them. And they each have thousands of languages. Yeah. But it's Europe that's the smallest continent, the fewest amount of countries. And you know, it's like, well, clearly we know who told this story. Yeah, yeah. I wish I could remember her name. There's a famous writer author who said, "Protagonism is propaganda." And I've always loved that phrase, because ever since I heard it, I look at movies and television completely differently, because it's true. When you're telling a story, you're presenting your perspective as truth. And I mean, obviously there's truths in that story for sure, but there is a level of, you know, especially when you start seeing just one of those stories told over and over and over, people believe it, and they believe that that character is true. And I've seen, you know, a lot of stories tell a perspective of a terrible person, like absolutely the worst person you can think of, but because they're the protagonist, we're willing to defend them and go along with them on their journey. And obviously there's some, you know, there's good writing to do that sometimes, but other times it relies solely just on who the protagonist is. So, you know, like Breaking Bad being one of the most famous versions of that, but they did it in a way where they told you at the end you were rooting for the wrong person. Yeah. You know, but like even when I go to like, you know, like mobster movies, or looking even at superheroes sometimes. Yeah. And it's like, you know, I used to love Batman as a kid, and now I look at him like, that's not a person I would be cheering for in the world, in the real world. Yeah. And it's like, and obviously times change, but it's like, I think, and also our understanding of morality gets updated, which is great. It should always be the case. But I find it interesting that our stories are coming from a place of perspective first.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, we assume that that means that they're good.
Yeah.
So we equate perspective or protagonism with morality. So it's like, I've seen a lot of people defend, you know, Walter White or, you know, James Bond, when it's like, he's actually a terrible spy. He's not good at his job. And he ruins every place he goes to, and with complete disregard to the people. He's terrible to women. He literally, like, it, and it's just like, he's actually a terrible person, but because we've been following that character, we just assume that there's something, and of course, it's not just protagonism, but the world that surrounds those characters agrees with those characters. And that's one of those things when it comes to world building that I think is always important, is I think a lot of people forget that the worlds of a story are just as fabricated as, you know, the characters that live in them. So, you know, in Gotham, everyone's kind of, not only are they mentally ill, but they look sickly. You know, like Joker's thin, he's gangly, like Penguin's fat and whatever. And you know, and Bane is just too huge. Like, it's like they're all cartoonishly, like, exaggerated. But they're each one of their purpose is to make sure that the protagonism feels neutral or default. So the world is doing a lot of work to keep Batman the hero. Yeah. And I think that's one of those things whenever I'm writing stories, I'm always thinking about that, but at the same time thinking about, okay, but I also want to make sure that you're seeing what the character is doing, as that you're open to judge them. And also open to see them fail or not quite do the thing you want them to do. I think there needs to be a better sense of the audience's interaction when it comes to bringing empathy to the table. So instead of just coming, you know, to the table and seeing Superman, it's like, well, clearly I'm supposed to like this person. You know, coming to a story where we see a character that doesn't fit that perfect understanding of what a person in America should be, but still feeling like they're a hero based off their actions. So I think there just needs to be, and I think video games do this really well. I also think, I mean, this is, especially growing up, anime has always kind of done this in an incredible way.
It was always like that in anime. And I think it's probably, because with animation, like even the bad character, like had like some reason. It's not like black and white. It's gray. He had some reason to act as he's acting. And for video game, I think it started with Metal Gear. To have like those story, like very you know, like with a different perspective.
Exactly. And I think, I mean, obviously, when it comes to entertainment, Japan and the US are just such juggernauts. That those are really, I mean, and it's only now that I'm starting to see, you know, stories come from Korea or India, Africa, like all these other places. And it's great because the more stories they get to tell, the more we get an understanding of what kind of stories you can tell. But because especially in the 90s, and especially for me, I was only seeing these two cultures' stories being told, I would gravitate to anime because it was the kind of story I didn't get to see a lot of. And all of those stories, they never viewed antagonism as being wrong. It was more about their actions that were criticized. So they were going about it in the wrong way. And especially with a lot of characters, there's more of a sense of befriending the antagonists. So there's always, you know, there's like a big bad usually in a lot of animes, but there's always like kind of a rival who is completely opposite to the character, but you see them become friends as time goes and progresses. And I think there's just something really, that's such a non-American way of telling a story. Because like you said, it's shades of gray.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they point out the flaws in the hero just
Mm-hmm.
as much as the hero will point out the flaws in the villain.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
because the heroes start from zero basically in animation.
yeah.
Start from zero and it evolve, and we see the evolution of the character, and we see his weakness and how he overcome all those weaknesses to be at the level to be able to achieve his goal and the challenge and face the challenges in front of him or her.
Well, you used a key word there that I agree 100%. That's evolution.
Yeah.
In almost all of the anime that I've watched, the hero has to build their strength. So it's something they have to train at or get progress. Whereas in a lot of American heroes, it just happens to them.
Yeah.
like out of nowhere, they just, they're either bit by a spider or, or
they born like that.
Rays,
yeah.
Or they just learn that they're Superman. Like it's always something that just kind of happens to them.
Yeah.
And because they have power, it's now their responsibility to carry it out. Whereas in Japan, or in anime anyways, it's you have to build that power. And it's progressive, and it takes time, and you have to really work hard. It's based off of your character more than it is based off of your circumstance. So and that's what's so interesting is that just these are just two cultures. Yeah. And they're just the only cultures that in the past were able to tell their stories, and already we're seeing like just such a huge difference between them. Imagine if every culture had that ability. Yeah,
that would be amazing. And recently I was thinking about usually the American character getting all the power, and I was like, it feels like that there is some kind of lobbying of the nuclear lobby.
Yeah. No. Well, this is one of those things that I think is so interesting. Like when I was in art school, I had an art teacher that told me every artwork you do is a self-portrait, whether you want it to be or not. Mm-hmm. And there's just so much truth in that when it comes to. I mean, I look at that in my own work all the time. Yeah. It's like, what is this saying about me? What are the things that I'm not noticing that this is saying about me? And there's always stuff there. Yeah. And I think you can tell so much about a person based off the stories they tell, because it betrays their inner thoughts. Yeah. And I think obviously the more you've done this, or the more control you have of a project, the more transparent it is. But with Western film, it betrays such. It's so European. Like it's so. Specifically, and obviously this is the case in Canada and also the U.S. It betrays such a tie to colonialism. Yeah. Almost in every facet, where it's like, I mean, even though Star Trek is always given this position, and it is rightly so, of a very forward-thinking kind of world, it's still very colonial, where everyone around the captain is a minority. Yeah. None of them necessarily are captains themselves. They all speak English. They all, even aliens speak English. Yeah. And especially in the 60s, obviously this improved over time, but even the 60s with Kirk, he goes to a planet, he sees everything that's wrong about them, tells them they're doing it wrong, that they need to be more like humanity. Correct. Yeah. And it's never, you never see humanity joining someone else's coalition. It's only aliens have to join us. Yeah. Then they will be fully realized people, essentially. Yeah. And I mean, this continues even now, where it's, even in films like Guardians of the Galaxy or other spacefaring shows, minorities are literally people of color. Literally, they're purple, they're green, they're they're decorations. They're not actual people.
Yeah.
They're, you know, and usually if they're female, they're attractive, and like the captain's always sleeping with them, and so they're exoticized, and it's like it's very clearly from that perspective, and it's like what is alien in all of these movies is what is not European. That's what alien means in most of those films. Same with robotic. You know, what is robotic is what is not male or what is not Caucasian. It's the other is us. You know, and it's like it's most of humanity is the other. So it's like even with Avatar, where it's like, you know, the alien is the Native American, African, like tribal, Asian. Like the other is always even more specifically non-Anglo. You know, non-English. And it's like, and so what's so funny about that is that they never take into consideration that most of the world is looking at this being like, that's clearly supposed to be us.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like it's clearly us actually, but what that perspective views as us. So it's like, you know, and it's like, if they're tribal, it's like they need to become more civilized. You know, if it's, or they're one with nature and they're completely devoid of technology. But they're never European. Like you never go to another planet and see like, you know, the Elizabethan British, you know, like kingdom. It's like, it's never that version of other. It's always kind of, it's signaled as that's just a person that in the world that we don't understand.
And so that's why I was have you seen 300? Yeah, that's why the movie 300 for me, it shows exactly like the perception of the other, like from from like European perspective, because 300 they're supposed to be like Greek, I guess. And so it's Europe, like and back in the days that was like the big empire and everything.
Well, no, continue, sorry.
And the thing is, in the movie they show precisely other people as monsters. They portray them as monsters, and I think it's a part of the like folklore. Like when they see like a stranger, it's like, oh, he was like giant with like big teeth, big nose, and he was dark like the devil or whatever. And that movies portray exactly like what like people think. Like
well, that's what's so interesting to me. Like even when it comes to that movie, I mean, you have King Leonidas, who's supposed to be Greek, but he's got a Scottish accent. You know, and it's like, and obviously they all look like Anglo-European, so like you know, from the UK at a time where the UK did not exist. And like and the coding is so clearly modern. So it's like, you know, they're talking about freedom against slavery, and there's plenty of Greeks that believed in slavery. Spartan was like the place was so not like that in any way, and it's like they might as well have said for America. Because they were pretty much there. It's just like, you know, and then you looked, and it was such a weird. I mean, when I watched the movie at the time, it was kind of like, all right, like this is just this really intense graphic thing, but you go, especially now, and it's just like, this is embarrassingly obvious. Like it's to like, we're at a point where it's like, you know, the Persians were apparently every other non-white culture that has ever been on the planet, and it's like you have, you know, Asian kind of ninja coded characters, and they take off a mask and they're literally orcs. And it's like,
exactly,
have like you know, Indian cultures, Middle Eastern cultures, and they're always given a sense of grotesqueness. They're never built. They're never like these huge, and like, and even literally down to casting, it's that way. Like, the Persians are not Persians. Like, the king of the Persians is from Brazil, which again is a country that did not technically, literally exist at the time.
Yeah.
And it's like, it becomes this thing where I know the story in terms of words is about the Greeks fighting the Persian Empire, but the story in terms of visuals is a completely different one. And it's I don't think it's an intent. I think it was accidental.
Yeah.
I don't think they were intending on telling the story this way, where it's like, and the story is about, white Western culture versus everyone else.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the story I saw.
Yeah.
So,
Me, that was what I saw. I was like, wow.
Yeah. And that's what's so funny. Like, it's like, I mean, it's always funny seeing someone's understanding of the world. It's like, even when you look at like a children's drawing, right? It's like they create, the first things they usually draw is how they see the universe. And it's like, here's my family, here's the dog, here's the animal, here's the house, and then the sun is over here in the clouds, and that's it. And it's like, that's the whole world to them. You don't want to draw the sky. That takes too long. That's too much. That's too many markers. It's too much blue. It's like you're prioritizing your world.
Yeah.
Right. And it becomes very much a reflection of what you believe.
Yeah.
And when you're telling a film, especially when you're making a movie and no one is challenging you, the more likely you are going to tell the story of the world that you think exists, not the world that actually exists. So it's just one of those things that I've, over time, come to realize that it's like, I'm seeing someone's very clear perspective of the world, not the actual world. So, even when it comes down to sci-fi, when it comes to like robots and that sort of thing, it comes down to very clearly that, no, robots are these cold, mechanical, evil things. And then, especially in the past, when someone would be like, well, challenge that. Why is that? And it's like, well, because there's something about humanity that's just special.
Yeah.
I would never see that story in anime, really. In anime, it was like, no, we just don't know. No one knows what they're doing. There's robots that are human. There's humans that are robotic. It's just a mashup. No one understands what these identities are. But especially because a lot of sci-fi was coming from America, there's a bit of a correlation that I've noticed where it's, the story that's being told is American exceptionalism.
Yeah.
Where it's like, America is great, but you won't know why. No one can tell you why. No one can tell you specifically why, but it is. It just is.
Yeah.
And everyone just feels like it is.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of, that thing where it's very emotional. Music will do the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
Or, like acting will do the heavy lifting, but in the end, no real answer is given. And that's always been frustrating for me, because it's like, no, I want to know what that is. Tell me what that is. I've not seen, and that's where anime is so interesting, because, whether it goes to the shell, or there's a video game that's fantastic called Nier Automata, and they really get into it. They try to figure out, everyone's asking the question, or if they think they know, it's shown as they eventually learn that they were lied to, or they were wrong.
Yeah.
Because the truth in all of those films is or in those projects, is they showcase that humanity is just kind of this messy, like nebulous concept. Everyone thinks they know, but no one really knows.
Yeah.
And we're all just trying to figure it out. And I think they usually showcase their characters, especially their heroes or their protagonists, as people that are okay with that. And so I think, and especially now that I'm seeing, Netflix, I'm watching Korean shows, I'm watching Indian shows, and not just like what life is like in those places, but futures, fantasies. And it's so cool because it opens my understanding. Because I think it's one of those things where I think, especially now with the internet, and if you want to find something, there's always some place to find it. I think we all have to kind of come to a place of humility and kind of realize that all of us don't know what humanity is.
Yeah.
It's too big, and none of us, we're all coming from a place of ignorance. And, you know, movies can help with that. Video games can help with that. Especially because with video games, it's based off experience, not off of, you know, a passive watching experience. So I think there's just something, stories, like in terms of the technology, it's there. It's possible to tell these incredible stories, but everyone is instead choosing to just retell stories that they already knew.
Yeah.
And that's just to kind of bring it back to what you were saying, where it's like, there's a lot of movies I just don't watch. They're just not interested.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of that. It's so much safer to tell a story we've already heard, and a story that we already know we like.
Yeah.
Than to be completely caught off guard. You know, and surprised, and kind of, you know, when sci-fi is done well, like The Matrix, you go in, especially when I was a kid, and, you know, it was a story about how none of us are actually living in the real world, and none of us know.
That was crazy.
And even to see some people thought that was okay. They would rather live in, you know, a fake world than a real world. And you got to see machines' perspectives about how they hate being there too. And it's like, there was just such a, that was such a good movie because it presented perspectives that you didn't have.
Yeah.
And then also dared you to question your own reality. And that's such a hard thing to do in real life.
Yeah.
But it's so easy to do in a story. And, you know, and so obviously when that movie came out, everyone's like, what, you know what made The Matrix great? Bullet time. Let's just keep doing bullet time. You know, and it's like, we'll get everyone to love our stories. And it's like, people always copy the wrong thing. But like, I think, you know, instead of doing another Matrix sequel, which could be great, I don't know.
I don't know.
Let's do something new. Start.
I think so.
You know? So I mean, and that's always been, actually, even as a kid, I always had this weird, like specific rule that I would never copy another character. So if I ever wanted to, so I would play Mortal Kombat and get inspired and like, oh, I want to do a cool video game character, like a fighting game. I would make my own fight character. And same with, you know, Metroid. I would make my own kind of character for that, or all these properties. I just never wanted to do what's already been done. I think it's important to always start fresh. So I made it it's still my rule. It's still my number one rule. I always want to tell new stories.
I can see that like in EXT, because it's like female lead character and robots, and that's actually the action is not like in the place of the like human, like not human, but where we see the character. It's like in that's like that's really crazy. And that's the fact that there is like because me, that's one of the things I really loved in the EXT is that there is different worlds, and the world that we would expect to live actually is like completely abandoned, and the people live in the digital world, and I think that the fact that we have those robots, because that make me thought about a lot of things actually after watching EXT. It's because I used to watch like anime. I'm still watching anime, but since I'm like kid, and I was very attached to those characters. Like for example, when a character died, I was like, oh my god, I was almost crying. And that made me thought about like what we discussed about when I saw EXT. It's what make people like human. And when we see the animation, there is all the characteristic of a human being, but that's like 2D characters. And we have like a connection, like feelings, and yeah, that's really make me think that we need like more content that make us like think about that.
Well, that's always been kind of another thing that I always wanted to do, is always try to get people to empathize with something that's usually very easy to demonize.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, when obviously robots, if like, even especially in the West, you bring up the word robot and people immediately think like Terminator or like something that's going to wipe us out or something like that, which I actually think it's more of a reflection of America's fears, kind of what they've done to other people, or like,
exactly.
I think there's something there. But like, when it comes down to non-human characters, I think usually they're treated as cannon fodder. So, you know, like if you watch or play video games, it's like you're shooting and killing aliens, you're shooting robots, and there's a sense of that's okay, and go nuts. And the thing that's so weird about that is that they're coded as other. So it's showcasing a relationship to something that's not you, and saying that because it's not you, it's okay to get rid of it. Wipe it out. And so I think there needs to be, you know, a sense of empathizing and changing the story. And for EXT, that was one of those things I wanted to do, where it's like, by all today's standards, they're not human. You know, they're not organic. They don't have an organic body or a biological body. They're mechanical. They you know, they're metal, they're this, or they're digital, they're programs, they're this and that. But the thing that I've noticed when it comes to anything that's coded as other is that the other always has to explain itself, where there's assumption that the self, or whatever's considered the self, never has to. They never have to explain themselves. So usually people will always say what human isn't, but they'll never say what what is human is. And that was something I wanted to do here, where you have, you know, there's generations that are now kind of fighting each other. And the oldest generation says that, you know, what makes humans human is the code that's based off of organics, when they were real people. And then you have the last generation is saying, you know, like, that's bullshit. Like, then the youngest generation is like, that's bullshit, because, you know, having a heart doesn't make you human. You can have an artificial heart and still be a human being. You know, speaking doesn't make you human. There's people that can't speak. Like every factor that you label, there's a point where you get to, well, there's actually nothing physical specifically that makes a human being and not something else. So the problem isn't the physical or the biological, it's the word. And it's the word that is sadly not up to the task. And it's the word that is where the problem is. So in this story, I wanted it to be something where we're slowly learning that there are organic people, that there are other things happening in this world. Now the range for what is human is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So it all comes down to a choice now. Do you want to use humanity, that word, as an exclusive term? Right? Do you want to exclude people from that word, or do you want to just use it as an inclusive term? So instead of saying you're not human because, it's saying, no, you are human. You are welcome. You are welcome to be a part of this family, essentially. And it's about that dialogue of actually talking about it. That was one of those things. I wanted to do a sci-fi that actually talks about what humanity is. And doesn't just kind of jump around it or try to like hide in vague terms about it. I wanted to address it, and I wanted to bring up that fact that, you know, first of all, humanity is one of over 6,000 words that mean us. Because every culture has their word or term for what humanity is. It's not humanity, that word. You know, and they've all have different understandings. Some cultures believe that humanity, you know, is something that you achieved when you were of a certain age. Some believed it was something that was based off of what gender you were, what class you were in society. You know, all of these words had different meanings, and they always updated the more they learned about the world. So, you know, when this culture ran into this culture and they realized, oh, there's something outside of us, maybe we need to term that, you know, the whole thing out as opposed to just this one group. And, you know, that's been humanity's struggle from the beginning, is trying to figure out how large this group is. And we're still figuring out new things about it. That's what's kind of insane about it, is the more people we give, you know, the ability to tell their story, the more we get surprised and realize, I didn't even think that was a thing. I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know that there's people that believe in this or think this way or don't have this ability or have this ability. I think it's especially in sci-fi, it should be an invitation to really play with these big ideas. If you're just going in to just say, like, watch, you know, colorful robot punch ugly looking robot, then, I mean, if that's what you want, awesome. But
there is more.
There's so much more.
And also, I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people think that, for example, Africa doesn't have any culture, because they just watch like their movie with their perspective, where that is like colonial vision of Africa, that's just savage, that makes noise and that dress and that have like a very like a spear or something like that. And also because like nowadays, like in Africa there is not like many movie. Now it's changing thanks to Netflix, I would say. But I haven't watched yet many movie there. But yeah, the thing is, since there is only one type of narrative like going around, like people don't know like how rich a culture, a country or a continent can be. I mean, when I say people, I mean in the Western, but not just Western, because also since, for example, from my experience, like in Asia, since they watch American movie, their idea of like a black people come from those movies that they see. So they're gonna be like, oh, you are a gangster, drug dealer, or you are you're a dancer, all that kind of things.
Well, this, and like I was saying before, like this was my experience, even just in Canada, right? Like, which you think would have a better perspective, but it doesn't. And you know, I just confused a lot of people. You know, like, it was just like, I had so many people that would just say very openly and very, you know, without any sense of embarrassment, you know, you're not actually white, or you're not actually black.
Yeah, me too. I had that so many times because I don't listen to hip hop. And I like black metal. I was
listening to like Marilyn Manson sometimes. I was listening to, you know, and it's just like it's such a strange thing to see someone go up to somebody and tell them that they're not doing them right. You know, like it's just one of those things that, and again, it's what's such a scary thing about the power of stories. Is that people believe the stories more than they believe the people. And it's why it's so frustrating, especially to see how Africa, which is a continent that's like 3 times the size of Europe, with, you know, 3 times as many languages, cultures, and all of those have nothing to do with the lines that are drawn on the map, because that was all after. You know, and some of those lines went right through,
like right through
cultures, and just like, and now you're this, and it's like,
just to serve the purpose of the Western countries.
That's it. And it's like that, there's such, I mean, you know, and then of course the problems and the issues that come out of those places that are because someone drew a line right through their country is attributed to that's their fault. And their problem. And it's like, I mean, if it's so crazy, because even if I were to kind of put it into a story where it's like someone went to Europe and drew 5 lines through it and said Germany Britain and France, you're now one country.
Yeah.
Deal with it. Speak one language now from now
Yeah.
on.
Like,
and like already, it's just like, well, of course that's absurd. Of course, fighting, and there's
we should do a movie like that, actually.
And that's what's so funny. Is like, put it into a story.
Yeah.
People immediately were just like, "Wow, I never thought of it that way."
Yeah.
It's absurd, and it's like, well, that's also history. That's actually true. Is that you know, when you have someone go through a place they don't know anything about. And immediately in a day have to figure out what the lines are.
Yeah.
You know, and again, people believe those lines. People believe those lines more than they believe the cultures, which are more complicated. Cultures are thousands and thousands of years of history rolled into people, and it's like it astonishes me how the story that's been told about Africa is believed so easily. And I even put myself into that. When I was a kid, I didn't know anything about that. What little I did know came from my parents.
Yeah.
You know, which taught me all about African history and even the stuff that the little that they knew.
Same here.
You know, like there's a certain point even in our family where we don't know where we came from because it was systemically erased.
Yeah.
You know. So it's like even there's so much of an identity issue.
Yeah,
understanding my connection to Africa, but it's like even there, the story, like even when it comes to like, you know, we think of fantasy and we think pretty much just Europe.
Yeah.
But the truth is, there are so many incredible historical and like mythological stories that are not just in Africa, because even that's ridiculous. Like Europe as a continent doesn't have one story.
Yeah.
So it's like, why does this come? You know?
Exactly.
So, hi. It's my wife, Susie.
Oh, yay. Hi, Susie.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so it's that kind of thing where it's like stories are so easy to believe.
Yeah.
And I think that has to be realized by anyone that is telling a story that, you know, obviously you want to tell your truth, you want to have fun. At the same time, you know, there's a responsibility that comes with that. And you have to understand, I think it's now great that, especially with video games and movies, there's so many people involved. Same with television, that you have a writer's room, right?
Yeah.
So you can get multiple perspectives on a story before it goes out. So it's harder to make those mistakes. And I think that's great. But there's still a lot of people I hear where they're like, why do we have to make everything like diverse? Why do we?
Exactly. That's sick. Seriously, when I hear stuff like this, that's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, and so and there's still that pushback. So to me, it's still crazy that like people still have to be convinced.
Yeah.
That that's necessary, because it's like, well, first of all, you're probably not telling just one story. You're telling a video game or a television story. You're probably telling multiple perspectives and multiple people in that story. So your story should also be written by that many people.
Yeah.
Or should have that many people involved. And it's not to say that a single person's vision isn't valid. It totally is. But I think, and this goes even for me, I love seeing everyone's take on what my story means to them.
Yeah.
Because it's not even like, what if I'm missing something? I'm missing something.
Yeah.
Always. This is, I'm always coming from that place of ignorance. I can't possibly know all these stories. So to have other people, you know, be a part of it is it's crucial. It's, if you want to tell a good, honest story about people, you need that broad perspective.
Because also, like, there is a lot of because I think that the fact that the narrative is very, very narrow right now, it's kind of starting to open. Yeah, but for example, in the case of movie where like African American are portrayed, for example, it always has been like about slavery, as if like the story of those people are started like from slavery, and before that, nothing happened.
Yeah.
And they try to make kind of, for me, I see that, I don't know if it's purposely or if it's so embedded in the culture that for them, like in North America, Black people, history start from slavery. And so I believe that's the reason why they say that, oh, Black people don't have history, because they think about slavery, and for them there is nothing before, and
well,
they don't even,
and
they
that's
don't
also,
try.
well, and that's the thing, is that, I mean, it doesn't reflect, it does reflect a truth, and that truth is that, you know, through slavery, the slave owners were the ones that erased that history from those people. So there is a truth there, and that those people and you know, North American Black people, they started from that point, and because of that, almost had to start fresh. But that's not even the entire African story. Most African people don't even live in the U.S. But it's assumed that it is, and it's assumed that it starts with slavery. But it's you know, it's so crazy to me, because, you know, humanity is 500,000 years old, let's say, being generous. People just think that that's European. But the truth is actually that starts from everybody. Like every culture that you know of starts from that history. So it's like, now think of, you know, there's over, like, I think it's something like 5,000 languages at least in the world. Now think of every one of those languages is a culture. Every one of those cultures is 50,000 years old at least. Now, immediately you're just like, it's overwhelming. Like that's the amount, and it's like, even with all of the I mean, currently called countries in Africa. Think about how many people are actually there, and all of them are completely different from each other. That's the other thing, is that none of them are telling the same story, because why would they? France and Germany don't tell the same story, so why would, you know? So it's just like, it's such a failure of imagination. That entire continent has been summed up, you know, as one monolithic thing. Like the whole, like, if you brought it up to almost anyone in America, they would think it was Wakanda. You know, like, it's like that's what that whole continent is. You know, that's a huge piece of the earth right there, and it's like, you know.
To be very honest, me at the beginning, I hated the concept of Wakanda. Because me, I was reading Black Panther in the comics, and I was like, what the fuck? They cannot, like, come up with a real country. They have to.
and that's the other problem too, when it comes to, you know, who's available and who's able to tell their story, because the thing is like, you know, and it's not to say that in fantasy or European fantasy doesn't make up their own countries. They do all the time, and that's fine. But the problem is that that's the only story that, you know, people from outside Africa think about Africa. And it's like, if you were to give, you know, the people there in all of those countries the means to tell their own story, you're going to get more stories than every film that's been filmed so far in Europe and in America, easily. And that's the other part of it, is that, you know, the myth is that Europe and America have the most stories to tell. But the truth is, no, they just have the most wealth and power to tell those stories. It's not reflective of the culture and its depth. It's reflective of the means.
And let's not discuss where they get the wealth today.
I'll have that another discussion later. But yeah, like it's not, and I think that's what's so difficult about it. And it's the same even with Canada. Growing up, especially in Saskatchewan, where there's a large population of Native peoples there. Like it's one of those things where it's like there were entire nations throughout Canada that were completely different from each other, and I don't know. I have such an embarrassingly low understanding of those cultures.
Yeah, same here.
And you know, and so it's so, and it's, you know, obviously now with what's happening in the States and in Canada too, with like the removal of statues and stuff like that, and I can't help but be mind blown when people say like, you're erasing history. And it's like, no, history has already been erased. You know, and it's like, like when it comes to Canada, I don't know most of its history. It wasn't taught to me. You know, it was taught as something that happened before a long time ago, and there was, you know, one native group in all of North America that was somehow all the same thing, and you know, none of them had anything that was different from each other. And and again, it's like if I were to tell the story of if someone went to Europe and just said like, you're all just one thing now.
Yeah, one thing, yeah.
You know, and from now on you have this identity. You should all agree with each other now, and you know, and choose one of you to represent the whole, so that we have a question to ask. That one person knows the issues, everyone there, and it's such a, again, it's a failure of education. And it's a failure of imagination. I think, you know, when it comes down to history, I think we think, and it's literally how it was taught, right? You go to, even in university, when I was taught, you know, art history, it was Egyptian art, maybe Middle Eastern, and then the rest was European. And ancient art was African and, you know, Middle Eastern. That was ancient. But everything after was just European. And already it's like, you know, you're being told a very small perspective. That's a story. It's not actually history. History is, you know.
And the impact is huge because, like, I think it was last year, I saw, I think maybe you know, Kid Bash 3D. Yeah. And they made a pack called Savages, and it was like,
oh no.
They and the pack was about like a very primitive, I would say, constructions. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, should I send something or and but that was like, oh my God. And
well, and that's the other part, right? Is that like, clearly that wasn't made by someone that was of that culture that they were. And it's like like for me, it would be like for me to kind of do, you know, to put out a package just like the European pack. Like, you know, like powdered wigs and like a kilt, and it's just like so embarrassingly offensive that it's like, and it's like, and the thing is, and I'm pretty sure, not 100%, but I'm pretty sure that probably didn't come from a place of intent. They probably weren't intending to do that. They just didn't think about it. It was coming from a place of ignorance. Right? And the sad thing is that whenever someone calls that person out, it's probably going to be reacted to in hostility.
I'm pretty
you
sure.
know, where it's like, oh, everyone's PC these days and this and this. And it's just like, no, it's just that you weren't taught the things you should have been taught when you were younger. Like when you learn a lot of these things as a kid, you don't have to make these mistakes when you're an adult. And sadly, we're not taught the whole human story, but we're taught as though we are.
Exactly.
So we think that we got everything we needed to know out of, like, you know, grade whatever, or from kindergarten to grade 12 or whatever. And that everything after that is just people being too offended. And it's like, no, it's just, you need to understand that you don't know.
You don't know exactly.
You don't understand it. And we were not taught, we were taught the story that benefits the countries that we live in. You know, and I think that also has to be something we have to take into consideration, that we're being told a narrative from the ones in power. And the ones in power, their primary motivation is to maintain
The power.
So
Yeah.
it's never going to be, let's actually get into it. Let's, you know, go into our past. Let's bring out all the terrible things that have happened there and figure it out and understand where it comes from and what it's done. It never comes from that place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and I mean, that's, I think there's that also concept that, you know, today, none of those issues, the issues of racism or sexism or any of these issues are not going to be existent in the future. Because, and again, this comes from a clearly specific perspective.
Yeah.
But, you know, you look at Blade Runner, you look at all these things, and it's like racism, the word doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But they assume that it as a whole doesn't exist, but you're still seeing racism, you're still
Exactly.
seeing sexism there.
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's just the addressing of it is gone. And it's like, I think I get it. It's that addressing is the part that's seen as uncomfortable. It's not seen as something that could possibly exist. And I think that's the other part of it, is that, you know, if you're going to talk about the future, and if you're going to talk about humanity, think about all that exists now.
Yeah.
And then imagine where that can go. And like, even like, for example, with EXT, one of the things I wanted to talk about was, okay, so if people are people, they're still going to want to have kids. Yeah. And it's like, that's that one issue that I don't think people usually think of when they get to like a human mind in a robot or a human or whatever, is that even if it doesn't make sense, people still want to be people. Yeah. And they're still going to want to eat. They're still going to want to do the things that are pleasurable for them, even if it doesn't make sense. And I think it's that understanding of, okay, you can push the technology however far you want, but it's still going to involve people. So you have to really be honest with how people react to that thing. And I mean, Black Mirror does a good job of that. Yeah. You know, there are a few shows that do a good job of that, but I think even in our modern day, I think people assume that technology has none of those things, that technology is the future. And because it is, it has nothing to do with the past. Yeah. It lives in its own bubble somewhere. Yeah. Like, and I think that frustrates me too, because it's like, you know, I've seen people when they talk about Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and it's just like, when you bring up racism, there's like sense that doesn't exist in machines. And it's like, no, but machines are made by people. Yeah.
Because we see that in the AI that cannot recognize like Black people's face or hand, like all those machines. And so like, yes.
Exactly. And even when it comes down to, you know, to feminism, when it comes down to, you know, they created, why did they make Siri a woman? Yeah. Because
exactly.
You know, like, because it's like whoever
exactly.
It wasn't a woman that you know.
That's true. That's true.
So it's like, even there, and it's like, even if, you know, some people will say like, oh, it's nicer to listen to a woman's voice than a male's voice. Even there, you're still talking about a bias. Yeah. About humanity, and it's like, those biases don't go away the more technology we get. Yeah. They're still there. And I think it's people, especially when it comes to, I mean, right now it's very clearly like we're living in a sci-fi world. Yeah. You know, just by all of what we're surrounded by and all the tech that we have. And the thing that no sci-fi ever predicted really was that racism would still be such an issue.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, that's the thing. It's just like, we still have, you know, you can watch a video on YouTube about a robot doing backflips, and then the next video will be about this racist thing that's, you know, someone said. It's like, that didn't go away. Yeah. This is just always going to exist as time goes on. And but sadly, sci-fi hasn't really kept people realizing that should exist. Yeah. So I think there's a frustration where people are like, this should be a past issue. I don't want to think about it. Yeah. Why? Because all of sci-fi tells me it shouldn't exist in the future. Therefore, it shouldn't. And it's like, well, then it's the story's fault. Yeah. It didn't prepare you for the obviousness of what the future is going to hold. And I think there's that obligation where it's like, if you're going to write a story about people in the future, take a long, honest look at what's going on in the world, and bring that up, address it, talk about it, because people are more likely going to feel okay to talk about those issues in a sci-fi or fantasy than they will sadly about in a documentary or a movie that's a quote unquote about real life.
Thank you for listening to African Action Heroes, the podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode, learned something interesting, and had a good time. Continue the conversation on our website, africanactionheroes.com. Make sure to share your thoughts in the comment section. And of course, if you believe this podcast could help or interest someone you care about, make sure to share it. It was TAMKO, our image, our stories, our narrative.